This is Dan of Vagabond Awake. In this report, I'd like to share why my life sucked when I first moved overseas. Just knowing this feeling is not unusual when you first move overseas can help you get through this period of time. If you don't know about this or what to do about it, you could think there's something wrong with you. You could get depressed and stay depressed living overseas. So this is so important that I share it once every few years or so new people can learn about it before it's too late. Most people go through 4 emotional phases when they move overseas. I'll explain the stages to you, and then I'll give you some tips and tricks that may reduce your frustrations and give you a softer landing in your new life. You're probably wondering why I feel qualified to talk about moving overseas. I left the United States over 16 years ago, 67 countries so far. I only visit the USA now. I've never moved back. I was 47 years old when I escaped the USA. I had dreamed of seeing the world my entire life. I was highly motivated. I had a really good time at first, but after the first few months, my dreams felt more like a nightmare. Starting around the 3rd month, I went through a period where I thought the way they did everything on the other side of the world was upside down. I began to doubt the wisdom of my choice to leave the good old USA. Everything over there started to feel really awkward to me, and that awkwardness lasted for about 6 months. It felt like I was trying to swim in a 3-piece business suit. I later learned why this happens to so many people. Let me explain. I struggled for about 6 months before I just started to feel like my old self again. And by the end of the first year, I felt like I was really having a great time overseas. And by the beginning of the 2nd year, I knew I would never move back home. I wanted to see more of the world. Once I was feeling great again, I found out why new people go through this period of upset. I ended up at a party with a bunch of employees that were working at the U.S. Embassy overseas. One of the newer employees was complaining about how hard it is to be away from home. An older employee explained why her awkwardness was probably just temporary. Almost everyone experiences that frustration in their first overseas assignment. In fact, the U.S. State Department teaches overseas employees this phenomenon before they are allowed to fly overseas. They call this frustration cultural adaptation curve. Recently, one of you reminded me of this concept and sent me this link to the U.S. State Department, and I'll show you the slides as we go. But when people first move overseas, they often go through 4 emotional phases. The 4 phases include the honeymoon phase, the frustration phase, the adaptation phase, and the re-entry phase. I'll briefly talk about all 4 phases and then discuss ideas about how to reduce your frustration. If you learn about this before you move overseas, you'll increase your chances of success. You'll understand that you are supposed to be feeling this way. After the 4 phases, I'll share some ideas about how to accelerate your cultural adaptation. Okay, the honeymoon phase. The first phase is called the honeymoon phase. When you first arrive, everything is exciting, fun, fascinating. You'll feel lucky to be able to travel around the world and learn about a new country. You're excited. Frustration phase. Once the honeymoon is over, you may go through a phase where you are frustrated because you're no longer get your home foods, you don't know where to buy things, you can't find your favorite products and brands, the locals don't seem to know how to make things right, and you just wish you could drive down the street and get all of your normal everyday foods and conveniences from home. The length of this frustration period varies substantially depending on the size of the canyon between your home culture and the new culture. Cultural differences such as language, music, traditions, clothing, and other mannerisms can feel insurmountable to you during this time. The frustration phase is when many people living outside their home country will start hanging out with people of similar cultures. They find themselves talking about what is wrong with the country where they're living. Many expat clubs and organizations seem to be hotbeds of frustrations. You can confirm this just by listening to what they're talking about. Why don't they understand how to run a country? How hard can it be to learn how to do things the right way? If I did my job like them at home, I would get fired. Why don't these people know how to act? Many expat circles are a hotbed of frustration. Hanging out with frustrated expats and talking like this is a surefire way to multiply your frustrations. You'll end up going home early before you can ever learn how beautiful the world really is. If you would like to learn how I fired my boss and traveled the world for 16 years and how I pay for things, grab a free copy of my ebook. This is like pulling the emergency brake on your cultural adaptation. But if you can hang on there long enough and get through this period, you're likely to enter the next phase of your adventure, the adaptation and acceptance phase. If instead of going deeper into the frustration phase with other expats, instead, if you become more interested in learning about the new culture, the new foods, and getting to know the locals around you, you'll naturally begin to accept the cultural nuances and the beauty of life around you. Adaptation and acceptance becomes possible through natural curiosity. When your curiosity about the world grows and you learn about the world and people around you, you will be on the right course to living happily overseas. Another way I like to talk about this is once you become a student of the new world, instead of a teacher of why the old world is better, then you're on your way to authentic happiness. Acceptance of how things actually are around you, along with an added natural curiosity, along with the spice of local friendships, are the keys to living happily almost anywhere in the world. Okay, the reentry phase. The reentry phase is what happens when you try to go home after living overseas for a few years. You see, during the frustration phase, some of us begin to form a romantic fantasy about how perfect our home country is. But when we try to re-enter our home country, we feel frustrated again. We're surprised to watch our romantic fantasy get shattered when we try to go home. Many of us only last a few months before we're ready to start another adventure overseas. A splash of cold water on your romantic fantasy about home is likely to wake you up pretty quickly. People we have not seen in years are talking about the same things and living exactly the same way they were when we left a few years ago. We sincerely love them, but we see the world through a broader lens now. It's almost like we're having dinner with them 2 or 3 years ago. We excused ourselves to go to the bathroom, but instead we moved to a foreign country for a few years. But when we return, it's like they're still sitting at the same dinner table, almost completing the same sentence. You might feel like it doesn't matter whether you left 10 minutes ago or 3 years ago. You may wonder, if I left again for 5 years, would I miss anything? So when I returned home for a 6-month visit, after about 3 years, I only lasted about 2 months, and I wanted to travel again. Instead of bathing in the familiarity of the fantasy of my home, I was craving the life that I had before coming home. I began to fantasize about other countries, and I bought another ticket out of the greatest country in the world. My fantasies about home were over. So upon our first reentry into our home country, many of us decide to return to overseas living. Okay, here's some tips and tricks to reduce your frustration. Now I'll explain about how to reduce the chances you'll go home during the frustration phase. Okay, here are 6 things I did to reduce my frustration when I first moved overseas. I will list these in reverse order with my best ideas last. Study the culture, religion, language, and history. Read about where you are in the world. The internet is full of information. Learn about the culture, the traditions, language, history. Notice cultural differences around you and research why they are that way. What do they mean? What do cultural symbols, colors, architecture, histories, heroes, and holidays mean? Knowing about the culture will give you a greater appreciation for the people around you. Learn how to cook local foods. As new expats, many of us try to find the foods we used to eat in our home country. That will be very frustrating in most of the world. No matter where you live overseas, the food will rarely be like home. So it will be endlessly frustrating trying to eat your favorite comfort foods from home and being disappointed over and over again. Instead, learn about the local famous foods and ingredients. You will almost always find some new flavors you actually like that taste nothing like home. Food exploration can be the moment your life turns from not as good as home into surprises you can't get at home. Learn how to cook the foods, where to buy the ingredients, and the best local cooks. Now you have stories you can tell about the new world. Okay, make local friends. Take them to lunch. Have them take you to their favorite restaurants. Ask them how they get specific problems solved. Ask them to explain local traditions and holidays. So if you can get invited to a local wedding, go for it. Learn about the local foods and ask your local friends if they know any great cooks. Invite them over to teach you how to cook the local meals. Volunteer at charities facilitated by locals. Find local classes on cooking, exercise, hiking, or other local activities. Once you have local friends, you'll start to see the people and their culture more warmly. Also, read my report, The Top 10 Mistakes New Expats Make. Link provided. Okay, next up, increase the honeymoon phase period. Here are 2 ways to increase the length of the honeymoon period. If you can increase the length of the honeymoon phase with either of these 2 tricks, your frustration phase will likely be shorter and will not be as emotionally challenging for you, in my opinion. Okay, increase country excursions. Every other weekend or so, or at least once a month, go on a 1 or 2 day excursion in your new country. Do a little research about the place you're going to visit. Research the people, places, and events that made that place famous locally. Do your research before you go. Then hire a local guide for a few hours that can tour you around and answer questions about what you've learned. But what if you have the freedom to travel with very few limitations? Do the slow travel lifestyle. By traveling to new places every few weeks or months and staying there, whether in the same country or in new countries nearby, we seem to stay in the honeymoon phase. It may not be as expensive as you think. Plus, I never seem to suffer the frustration phase for more than a few days when I go to a new place. I'm including a link to more details about how to save money as you slowly move forward traveling the world in case you're interested. And the link below will be called Slow Travel World Highway. Thanks for reviewing my report, Why My Life Sucked When I First Moved Overseas. If you have enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember to click the More Information link. It'll be the top link in the notes below this YouTube video. And all the links I talked about will be there. This is Dan of Vagabond Awake, the YouTube channel for vagabondbuddha.com. The world is your home. What time will you be home for dinner? Could you please help me with something? You've probably watched our guest star interviews on our guest star playlist. I interview people that have retired overseas. They share valuable information such as cost of living, safety concerns, finding love overseas, healthcare experiences, and money problems. If you'd like to share something that you have learned living overseas, please come to vagabondbuddha.com, click the More tab, click the Contact Me tab, and tell me about what you would like to share with my channel.